What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Yours Truly podcast, a place we go to think out loud. I'm your host, Christian Baxter, and today I am excited to have Courtney Trotter join me in the Yours Truly virtual studio. Courtney is a PhD student at Beeson Seminary and has specialized in Greek and Hebrew. Courtney has been a TLC lurker, I think, and we met at the Midwest Estuary conference up in Chicago just over a week ago. She came up to me, introduced herself like several people did at the conference. Hey, really, I've listened to the podcast some and all that. And I'm like, oh, cool, nice to meet you. And as she began to get into her story, I quickly realized that we had a profound resonance related to our experiences in kind of American evangelicalism and where we've come out of that in a sense, and then looking back on it, identifying it's probably the areas that I see it having its greatest weakness related to being a part of the big tent of Christian Orthodoxy, namely its inability to be able to perceive a perspective on what is sacred. And this then goes into John Verveke's work, and we're going to get into that today. Courtney has been paying attention to this corner of the internet for a while, so this episode will be something along the lines of lurker, rando, but also hit the ground running on looking at things this corner of the internet looks at. So I'm excited to get into the conversation today, see where it goes, and just share her with you guys, in the digital space. I'm excited about that, and I look forward to seeing what the fruit that might come from this conversation. So without any further delay, I give you Courtney Trotter.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.
We're recording. All right. So Courtney, thank you for coming on the Yours Truly podcast today. And as we were talking backstage, I thought it would be appropriate, and I mentioned this in the intro, but just that this is kind of you coming out of the lurk of the corner, and this little corner of the internet. You went to the Midwest Estuary Conference. And so let's just start with, the magic question of tell us about the home you grew up in and kind of how you found yourself in this place.
Yeah, coming out of the deep lurk, Paul asked at that conference, are any of you coming out of the lurk? And it was me. Some people were surprised when they asked, like, oh, how long have you been following the space? What you got you into this space? I'm like, I don't know, 2015, 2016. And I've never made a comment, never tweeted, never made a YouTube comment or anything like that. Never joined a Discord server. So I'm kind of a anti-technology Luddite, but I know what's happening on the internet. It's kind of, my husband says, I'm living into that paradox. So yeah, but I grew up in Daphne, Alabama, which is on the Alabama Gulf Coast. So I'm kind of a beach kid with Southern vibes. So it's really fun. In terms of my background, I realize even more, the more that I tell the story, I really just am living into a ton of paradoxes. But my father was born in Brazil and came to the United States via Southern Baptist missionaries. They ran the boarding school in his hometown. And so whenever he wanted to go to college, they helped him get to college here in the United States. They had a partnership with a small Southern Baptist church in rural Alabama, just outside of Mobile, which is how he ended up on the Alabama Gulf Coast. And the people who I now call my grandparents, who are very formative in my life. So from here on out, if I say my grandparents, I'm referring to these people, but they were the pastor and the pastor's wife who took my dad into their home and gave him a place to stay while he went to college. And he kind of just never went back to Brazil. That was a long-term plan, but he never went back to Brazil and just kind of stuck next to them. And grew up with them and grew up with their kids who were 4 and 2 at the time whenever he went to college. And so those are my aunt. That's my aunt and uncle. And he's just like the weird brown kid in the white family. So everybody growing up always tried to figure out like how my grandfather, my home church pastor, was related to me, and they just couldn't figure it out because they're like blonde hair, blue eyed people, and then there's my dad, but that's how it worked. Yeah.
So that was growing up. So you're half Brazilian. Is that what you're and so Southern Baptist missionaries made a way for your dad to bring you here. I've told that story, like on my side, is that I don't know if it was some kind of missionaries that got my dad to the United States at a little Methodist church, many years ago, and from Korea. So yeah, we were just kind of like, man, all these kind of like similarities. We've seen these things. So like, tell us, so you grew up Southern Baptist. That's kind of, I guess, and I mentioned in the intro that you're a PhD at Beeson. So,
right.
So tell us about getting into that, the in-between now.
The in-between. Yes. So Southern Baptist, but both my dad was born to a Jewish family in Brazil, and my mom also is part Jewish, like her dad is Jewish. So I say I'm Southern Baptist who's a little Jewish, because I wasn't raised religiously Jewish, but I did have that kind of identity growing up. So the way that I was raised, especially as the firstborn child of an immigrant, was to be a doctor or a lawyer. In that context, which every time I say that to people who are Jewish, they're like, yeah, I get that. Like that was what was projected onto me as well. And so like as a 4-year-old, I could, name the entire human anatomy and all the major organs and their function and all of those kinds of things. Cause like the dinner table was where you sat down to learn things, and in a very Socratic method kind of way, where you ask questions and you just continue to ask questions and kind of foster curiosity. So that was how I began to approach the Bible. And I always just related more to the Old Testament because of my Jewish heritage. And I saw like these stories formed my people in the ways they formed both sides of me, like the Christian Southern Baptist church side of me, but also the way in which I came to understand my identity through my like natal family. Right. So because of that, I was just always interested in the Bible. Like I was just that kid.
And so we're back. We had a little robot section. So you were always interested in the Bible as a kid.
Right. Yeah. I was always interested in the Bible. I was reading it late at night. I think I read through the entire Bible the first time my like 6th grade year, like cover to cover, just because I was like, oh, okay, like I'm in middle school. This is something I need to do. And I'm old enough now, I guess. I put that on myself. But I loved doing that. So even though I had these interests in like science for the medical field, because my dad was a scientist. I don't think I mentioned that. Okay. So he worked in medical research at the University of South Alabama. And so I had those interests, but I mean, the Bible just, I just loved it. And I wanted to spend all my time reading it and doing it and going to church. And I just loved those things. So ultimately I kind of felt called to ministry, and we could talk about what that call felt like and how to process that within a Baptist context.
I think that's appropriate. Yeah. So, and a complementarian, to use the word that's been handed to us, Southern Baptists don't ordain women, but feeling called to ministry, you're kind of given children's ministry and maybe, maybe
youth. Yeah. Women's ministry.
Yeah.
You could always be a missionary for sure, because there's Lottie Moon, and that's Annie Armstrong. So they're your heroes growing up. In my Southern Baptist context was not one that I felt like I needed to deconstruct from. I feel like I need to say that. Like a lot of people apologize for being Southern Baptist, or they like talk about it as if it was like a traumatic experience. Right. I just loved my home church. Still, if it were the same, it's not the same. But if it were the same, I would still love my home church. I love the people there. Every single time I go home, it is like going home. The type of church that we were, it was a church plant. My grandfather planted that church. So whenever I was born, it was like 2 years old. But it was the kind of church that was really trying to not be fundamentalist in a Southern Baptist context that at the time was just really rife with that. So we were kind of early into adopting contemporary worship and, kind of in the Rick Warren, Andy Stanley, Charles Stanley type of model, but not overly programmatic or efficiency driven. Just like we want to love people and love Jesus kind of Southern Baptist culture, Like, we didn't talk about Revelation. I feel like how much you talk about Revelation is how much theology you need to deconstruct.
Yeah, so like where you're at on the kind of how important dispensational is in your stream, basically. Yeah, that's very these like kind of segments of that culture. You know, you kind of see the kind of fundamentalist culture, and then there's like the more prophetic culture, and then there's the modern, you know, all those kind of different things.
Yeah, but we still sang hymns too, you know, so like hymns. So there was this like blended, if you grew up in Southern Baptist culture at the time, the blended worship.
Which
that
is like,
was our
I know we're roboting again. Worship, like I kind of hate blended worship because it's like you're trying to be everything and you end up being nothing, like kind of type thing. It's its own version of like trying to do someone that knows how to play hymns on piano, people that like the modern stuff on the radio, and then they're trying to do those two things together, and it's its own thing.
Right.
But anyway,
it is its own thing.
keep going.
So yeah, but that's like when that's what you know, and
Yep.
and people generally did like it. Like there wasn't a fight about it. So sometimes in order to get there
Right.
in the Southern Baptist Church, you had to fight to get there. But this was like they wanted to sing the old hymns that they grew up on, but yeah, they did like the songs on the radio. So it was a good like kind of natural mixing.
Right.
And like I said, it was just much more of a like, this is a place where we love people kind of church. And because we grew up in Mobile, or like on the edge of Mobile, it was a largely Catholic area. So there weren't a ton of Baptist churches or even Protestant churches. And you kind of do things that are somewhat oriented around the liturgical calendar. Like everybody celebrates Mardi Gras. Like there isn't a Baptist stick in the mud who is not celebrating Mardi Gras usually. Or which sounds very anti-Baptist, right? Like, I don't know, the people who grew up not dancing or something, that wasn't like our Baptist church.
That makes sense.
And so, and there was also like kind of some Advent type of things, just because the whole church calendar is kind of dominating you whenever you have a super Catholic area like that. Like we had Fish Friday, like we had fasting Fridays in public school.
So then you're feeling called to ministry. So you're the total Baptist milieu, but kind of distinctly kind of surrounded by kind of a Catholic dominated culture, which, you know, in the deep South with New Orleans, Mobile, like those are the pockets where that's going to create kind of a unique blend culturally that you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, it's a unique blend culturally and like food-wise. You know, so lots of people don't realize that, like, yeah, we are a lot closer to New Orleans because Mobile was the first capital of the French territory in the United States. So we have all the Cajun or Creole food and seasonings, and because of the port city, it meant that we had a lot of sugar and therefore really good desserts. Like a lot of your classic American desserts actually come out of that area of New Orleans or Mobile. Just because we had the ability to like make those kind of desserts all the time. So those things, like keeping alive some of those traditions, are really important to me. Like one of my goals, I know that you asked me about women in ministry, but I just feel like I need to put this out there. One of my goals is to be a little layer cake lady. And I don't know if you know what this is, but a little layer cake is
what's the little king thing that is part of like
that's the king cake. A little layer cake is like an 8-inch round circle cake that's made up of a ton of little layers with hot fudge, chocolate icing, and or caramel icing in between. And you have to like stack it. You have to cook it all at the right time and stack it all at the right time and get your icing at the right temperature when you put it on, so that whenever it's done, it's one nice like glazed tower. You know?
Very nice.
And it's like 8 to 12 layers of little layers. And
you want to be a little layer cake lady.
Yes, that's a thing. Like, people call somebody a little layer cake lady. Oh, she's a little layer cake lady.
She can do the cakes. She can do the cakes. Special cake.
Yeah, because that's what you'll buy it from somebody who's like, she just makes them out of her house, but for Christmas or Thanksgiving or something.
And this isn't something you buy at Walmart. You know, that's not really a thing.
Yeah, you need to know a little layer cake lady. Yeah.
Gotcha. So, and you're in Durham, North Carolina now, so you're trying to like bring some of that up. Maybe.
Well, whenever we go home at Christmas, right? So I made my first little layer cake this past Christmas, and it was really good, and it had the look and everything. It was beautiful. So I was like, okay, I did one, and so I think I can do this now. Yeah.
Very cool.
So my great grandmother, she was a little layer cake lady. So yeah, when it came to feeling called to ministry, it was really kind of organic initially, just because I was in youth ministry, and obviously, like, whenever I talk about the Bible, I'm really excited about it. Like, it's just something, even now to this day, I just get so excited to kind of open up scripture to people and help them fall in love with the texts that have shaped our entire culture. And so people began to notice that early on. Like, I was like, the head of the FCA for middle school or high school and things like that. Yep. And people would say, like, hey, Courtney, like, you really can teach the Bible well, or my grandparents would say, yeah, Courtney, you teach the Bible hardly better than almost anybody I know. And I'm like 14. And I'm like, I don't know what that even means, but it's just like, I love this thing, and I like spend all my time doing it. Right. So, even to this day, I really don't know what they were encouraging me to do as a career. Like, I've asked them before, like, whenever you told me, like, oh, we think you got a calling to ministry in your life, I don't know what they thought vocationally I would do.
Probably just, I mean, at this point, Beth Moore was hitting the ground pretty hard. So there's kind of like that was happening.
Yeah, there was definitely that. And I do think we talked about how in the 90s, that was the highest time for women's ordination and women in ministry roles. And I think that even if they would have never ordained me in my home church growing up, like, they didn't see women doing things with the Bible or teaching the Bible as like a threat to kind of the complementarian order of like a head pastor and associate pastor. So I just think that they thought, like, she's got a gifting and we just need to encourage that. And you're right, there were more visible places for women to kind of to do that even outside of the church. Because I would say Beth Moore really is like a parachurch ministry. Yep. She's not really doing that within the church, but she's within every single church. Right?
I think she taught a Sunday school class of like several hundred at her church, right?
Yeah.
How many of those people went on and listened to the sermon? You kind of wonder what.
Right. Yeah, no, she was within her church. But what I'm saying is, like, she didn't have some kind of role,
a pastoral role. Yeah.
Yes. And so really that's what you saw women doing, was kind of developing parachurch ministries that were larger even than their ecclesial body or their ecclesial connection. Right. So like Jen Wilkin would be kind of fitting into that today. Yeah. So I have no clue what they thought I was going to do. But my associate pastor and my uncle had gone to Beeson, and they all kind of said, and my grandfather and my youth pastor had gone to New Orleans, and they all kind of told me, they were like, Beeson would be a better fit to you than, going to a Southern Baptist seminary. At that time, I was like, I don't know what that means, but, sure. I was just really naive when it came to any theology outside of like our church or what I was reading. And like C.S. Lewis, like that was like,
makes sense.
Obviously, every Baptist theological influence was C.S. Lewis. So and they also told me, hey, go to college for something else, because you never know if you're going to need to be bivocational. Like, we've all four of them had been bivocational at some point in time, and they were like, you never know when those skills are going to be needed.
What did you get your undergrad in?
I got my undergrad in French and like second language acquisition and education. Oh. So I taught high school French. That's basically what I was like, certified to do leaving college. But I just love languages. And part of that was being exposed early to Portuguese in the home.
Okay.
Traveling to Brazil to visit family felt like, wow, this has opened up an entire new world to me, that even though like I have family there in Brazil, like the language is really the way to access all the things that I find are cool in Brazil. And without that, like, I can't quite engage the culture the way that I would like to. Right. So languages for me were the way to open up a whole new world. And I just absolutely love that.
And so then for your, I don't know if you got an MA at Beeson, you did Greek and Hebrew, correct? Was that?
Yeah. So they have an MDiv at Beeson. So I took a year off between like undergrad and starting of seminary, because my husband was doing like starting his PhD program in cancer research or cancer biology at the time. So I knew that I had plenty of time to finish Beeson. Like I could wait to start Beeson and get used to being married and all of those good things. So during that time, I did work in a mega church and also did substitute teaching in French and things like that. So I was like working in a recreation ministry at a large mega church. So yeah, then whenever I went to Beeson, it's an MDiv, and Beeson still has like what they would call a classical Masters of Divinity, where you're going to have like a lot of church history courses, and you're going to have to take 4 of each language. So 4 semesters of Greek and Hebrew. So 8 total semesters of language, 5 total semesters of church history, which is a lot. Like compared to most MDivs, that's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a year of Greek and Hebrew in my undergrad, and I can just basically remember Yod from Hebrew, like because it reminded me of Yoda. Like that's how.
Yeah, that's literally what I say every day, every single time I teach alphabet now. But now I relate it to Baby Yoda because it kind of floats at the top. You know, it's like floating, like Baby Yoda does.
It looks like a little comma or something.
Yeah, it looks like a little comma to the top.
Yeah, here I'm talking, admitting my like complete anemic version of biblical linguistics to a biblical linguistics expert at this point. But anyways, so you get in, you're studying language, you're feel called to do ministry, you're a woman in the kind of coming out of the Southern Baptist world. And then Beeson is, I mean, are they declared egalitarian in their statement, or like, but they seemed, your family thought that they were maybe a little bit more just like culturally would fit better in that regard. So
yes, so Beeson is interdenominational. So they have a chair, like they have money for a chair of all the major Protestant denominations. Like that doesn't mean that they always will have one, because sometimes they recently got a new Methodist chair. Like it just took them a while with the search and the like right professor fit of what they needed at the time to find a Methodist to fill that role. So because of that, they just kind of let you come in with whatever your ecclesial convictions are and come out however you're going to come out on the other side. The goal, the like slogan is like Baptists today, Anglican tomorrow. But I
shout out Matthew Barrett.
Oh yeah, Beeson is definitely like the Matthew Barrett pipeline. So many people go in Baptist and come out Anglican, but all that is to say is that they really do allow you to just be formed deeply in the Christian tradition, because like I said, they have that classical kind of MDiv curriculum, and to kind of work those convictions out wherever your denomination is. So you have professors who are complementarian and writing on that as they write their commentaries, and that they're complementarian. And then you have some professors who are egalitarian, and some who don't want to identify as anything.
Yeah.
And but nonetheless, they just are really there to kind of like help spark your curiosity. They don't see it as like it's a very open place to allow you to explore ideas and try on new ideas.
It sounds estuarial, and it sounds a little not incredibly ideological in a sense. So that's pretty
right. Yeah. And some of that is because of Mr. Beeson and his vision for the institution, because I think it started in 87 or 89. Like, so it's not super old, but Mr. Beeson, I think if I get this story right, he was raised Baptist. His wife was raised Methodist, and after getting married, they attended a Presbyterian church. So even though Samford as a university is Baptist, whenever he wanted to give money to start an institution, he wanted to be able to have a place where all of those kind of streams could mix and be supported, and like, so he had a vision for an interdenominational seminary that was intentionally incarnational. So there's like a cap on how many students can even be at Beeson because of Mr. Beeson's money. It's like never more than like 150 students or something like that.
Wow.
So you're assigned like a mentor professor whenever you get there. So there's like 5 or 6 of you who meet with a mentor professor every week to pray and talk about what's happening in life and those kinds of things. And you can switch your mentor group every year if you want to, or you can just stay in the same one all 4 years. But
hopefully Beeson will give me some money for promoting their.
I know. I'm just like really giving the whole spiel here.
So I guess like at the conference, we talked for a while, and you shared that in the recent years you've had kind of a pretty big shift. You're now a catechumen in the Orthodox Church, correct? So
Right.
so let's connect the dots between going to Beeson, this little corner of the internet, Peterson pipeline, Heiser, the parallel Heiser pipeline. Like, let's kind of try to how and when and those kind of impacts on your life.
Yeah, so I actually went to Beeson as a Baptist and came out Baptist. It was an impossible thing to do, but it happens. Sometimes it happens. But while I was at Beeson, I was a youth minister in a Baptist church there in town that was liturgical and sacramental, which is an interesting combination. Every single time I say that, it's like, oh, they were high church Baptists.
Say it one more time. You were at a Baptist church that was liturgical and sacramental?
Yeah. Or, now I would say sacramental-ish as an Eastern Orthodox Christian, but they did have a higher regard for baptism and for the Lord's Supper than what I had been raised with. And like I said, liturgy to be incorporated into that. Yeah. And our worship pastor, he had his doctorate he was a trained liturgist. That's what he was. He knew liturgy very deeply. He almost became Orthodox himself whenever he was doing that training. But that meant that we worship according to the church calendar, to the Revised Common Lectionary, all of those kinds of things at that church. And I was a youth minister there. And so that was at the same time I was doing Beeson, which was deeply steeped in church tradition and in the history of Christian thought and formation, and also was being able to experience that at the same time in my local church context. And as a youth minister, I was able to receive kids who are in the 7th grade and they already know the creed. They already know the Lord's Prayer. They already know so many things. And so by the time I get them, it's like, I'm now just teaching them what those words mean. Like I'm teaching them what it actually means to be a Christian. So it was like, I just told myself, I was like, I never want to not minister like this. Right.
So the catechesis, I read, gosh, I always forget his name. Alistair McGrath. He had a book called Faith and Creeds, and he did like a series years ago, and it was recommended to me by my pastor, who's our current pastor. And he kind of described the creed as like a skeleton for the meat of the bones to hang on. And that really was really powerful for me. Of course, I was like my late 20s whenever I read that, but you imagine giving that to, a children to then be able to hang the meat of, theology or church history on top of, and then, like you said, the Lord's Prayer as well. And that kind of, it's almost too simple to be like, no, we've got to do all these other programs, right? And that could be so powerful. Anyways,
it really is almost too simple. Of like, oh man, they just like you're just teaching them as you're going through Holy Week what these services are about, and then all of a sudden they know the life of Jesus, just because you're talking about what you're doing during Holy Week. But it is really that simple, because that's how we learn things, is in this embodied way. So around that time at Beeson, like my mentor professor, who I'm actually going to study and do my PhD under again, he had mentioned Jordan Peterson to me, and he's like, like you love the Old Testament, and we would talk about these kind of ideas. He was like, you'd love this guy's biblical studies lectures and through Genesis, because he's doing something fun, and he's an Old Testament professor too. So this was never seen as something or portrayed something to me that we should be wary of as Christians, right? So I didn't ever get that vibe. But at the same time, my husband had been paying attention to Jordan Peterson because of some of the, like, was it C16, C17 stuff? And he had told me, like, hey, you would like this guy's, what he's saying about Genesis 2. So he was paying attention to Jordan Peterson for that reason, just because of being in science.
Yeah, the intensities, the political intensities surrounding.
The political intensities surrounding Jordan Peterson, right? And some of the ways that the kind of language games were already being like impinging on his research in science. So that's how I started following Jordan Peterson. And then, of course, once you start doing that, the algorithm sends you Paul Vanderklay. There was a couple of other people like Beth El McGrew, whenever she was still Esther O'Reilly, who were talking about it, or Justin Brierley over in the UK. So once that happens, you're like, okay, I see this affecting my youth now. And I see these are some of the kinds of questions that they're thinking about, even if they're not willing to ask them. And this is the world, at least whenever they go off into college. Like right now, while they're here in Birmingham, they're in this kind of like safe-ish place. But when they go off to college, these are the ideas that they're going to be immediately thrust upon. Because I went to the University of Alabama, and even though that's in the South and it's in a highly Christian context, like, I mean, postmodernism was taught to me like day one as a French major, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
as a French major, it's like the seedbed of postmodernities.
The seedbed of the nihilism and the existentialism and all of those good things. And so you're going to have to reckon with those ideas and how to like come out as Christian on the other side of that. And so I just saw Jordan Peterson as a good way to help with that in youth ministry initially. Then we moved to Durham, North Carolina after we both graduated from seminary and him from his PhD program, so that he could take on a fellowship at Duke University. And that was like a culture shock that I wasn't prepared for, just because I thought like, oh, even when you visit, like it kind of looks like the South still there's some things that kind of feel like the South, but when you actually move here, it feels very different. It feels much more like, I mean, every other person you meet is from New England, like a New England transplant. So Boston, New York, maybe DC, something like that. So it's that blue culture down here in a highly intellectual format, because something like 2/3 of people here have a terminal degree. So,
Wow.
And it's all biomedical or tech.
Yeah. And so that's like Virginia, UNC, Duke, like Washington, DC, like that's just all like right there. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And then New York transplants, because it's cheaper. It's cheaper for like biotech companies or companies to like come down here and move all of their operations, or at least a large portion of the operations down here, than it is to be up there. And now we're getting the California move as well from Silicon Valley to here. So.
Wow. Yeah. And so all that kind of, it's funny to be talking about this on the internet in 2025, because like, I don't think you or I or many people even 5 years ago would have even said all of these things together. Knowing this was going to just kind of go out. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yet, you look at, I mean, this makes me just kind of think on like, at least on like kind of the political cultural layer, because it's like, then there's like the meaning and like the religious layers, or however you want to stack those, and which but like so on that layer, it's just even going back to like what Peterson was dealing with about language, and then you're like a language professor with a language undergrad, and you're specifically related to the postmodernists, like you're saying, as a French major, Foucault and Derrida and all these kinds of things. And that Peterson, I can say those words because of Peterson, like because he was dealing so intently with that kind of postmodern language games. And that was part of like you want to call it the authoritarian tendencies that were bumping up against kind of that American spirit of freedom. And we've basically had a mimetic civil war take place as a result. And now, but so you were seeing, and yet you can be in these kind of these cultures, like you're saying, like my wife and I were just talking this morning about Arkansas, because neither of us have like a strict, like a thick Southern accent, or even maybe a country accent, some, but and I was like, well, it's because both our moms were from cities. Like her mom was from Memphis, or my mom was from Nashville, and we both had that in our. And I think that was like, so you have these weird things happening, and all these things are mashing together, like you're saying, the kind of elite culture in North Carolina, which would have been considered kind of, Appalachia Hill country, as our friend Jordan Hall likes to say, Western North Carolina, Appalachian Hill country. Lots going on with all this stuff. And so
just to like solidify that culture for people in their mind, like I moved from Birmingham, Alabama, where 85% of the people identify as Christian and regularly attend church. And so that metric would be 2 times a month. That would be the regular church attendance. So like that's an actual thing. It's not just they identify as Christian, like they're going and they're involved. And here, depending on what kind of pocket of the triangle you're in, 70 to 85% of people do not identify with the religion at all.
Wow.
At all. So it's not like they're just not attending church. They don't identify with religion at all. And of the people who are religious, then a lot of them, like we have the Mormon temple here. So a lot of them were Mormon that we were meeting, or we have the second largest Hindu temple outside of India. So a lot of them are Hindu or Buddhist or Sikh or Muslim. So you're like, it's not, even if it looks like there's like everybody's like, oh, well, it feels so Christian. But then you're like, well, do you go to church? And they're like, no, I'm not a Christian. And it's because there's these vestiges of American revivalism all around. There's like the Methodist churches and the Baptist churches, and they're still doing ministry and they're still being effective in some sense, but it's all the people who are transplants like us looking for a place to go to church. So it was a very culture shock, and we were kind of having to live in both worlds, like live in the church on Sundays, but then, all of our friends are non-believers in some kind of way in the week. All of our neighbors are. So
interesting. So that's the makeup. You're up there after you graduate with your MDiv.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind, you talked about being introduced to Jordan Peterson related to that stuff. And then I already gave the spoiler alert that you're a Orthodox catechumen. Like, so
right.
Let's tell that. Can we tell that story? Like how
we can tell that story for sure. Yeah. So it's going to not end quickly, like into how we end up as an Orthodox catechumen, because that was just like this last year when it became really evident to me. So we've been here 8 years now. So since 2017. So whenever we moved here, it was initially very hard to find a job as a woman, even as like a children's pastor or youth pastor or something like that. Like I was totally fine to just submit to whatever kind of complementarian or egalitarian situation you'd find around here. But I was still committed to being Baptist, or as most Baptist churches present these days, Baptistic non-denominational, somewhere in that vein. But like I said, with these deep liturgical convictions that needed to be incorporated. So eventually I found a job at a kind of a church that was non-denominational, but from the Bible church roots. So like the worship director there had been really formed by like Dallas Willard and in some of this. So like they actually incorporated more liturgy, but with contemporary songs, but they had like a liturgical structure to the service, an opening call to worship with, every week you would read the psalm, like you'd have like regular readings from all three parts of scripture, and then like a corporate confession of some kind. And then it would end with communion every single week. And because of their convictions as well, they also talked about real presence in some sense at communion. They didn't talk against real presence at communion. So that was really important to me at that point in time. So it seemed like a really good fit. But I was the first youth minister they'd ever hired, because they also had been a church plant, and they were like 10 years at that point in time, 10 years old. So all the kids were going into youth groups. This was their first real youth group experience. And this is also something I would not have talked about publicly until maybe this last year. But about 6 months into being there, realized that the pastor had been doing I knew this was happening, but I didn't know the content of what was happening in this group. But he had been doing a small reading group with some people from the church through all of the regular woke literature, like Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, the new Jim Crow, all of those kinds of things. And so he had begun kind of shifting on some of those major topics as it relates to the church, kind of unbeknownst to most of the congregation. And it kind of came to a head in the youth ministry, and in a particular, like basically I gave a regular call to become a Christian, like, hey guys, after teaching you for 6 months, do any of you feel called to be baptized and all this kind of stuff? And as a result of that, like that was me being non-inclusive and wanting to kind of separate the group. And
that's what you were being accused of? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Of not by inviting people to baptism, you were creating an in and out group of exclusion, and that wasn't cool, related to kind of the
DEI framework.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
But to equity and inclusion. Yeah. Okay. And creating a safe space. Right.
So let's pause on that real quick and outline maybe specifically how you look at corporations doing this, you look at colleges doing this, but let's talk about like a church shift. And you may some maybe American mainline that's just been that, but that's been the case for 60 years. But seeing a transformation from something traditionally lowercase Orthodox and in teaching and praxis in a way, moving that ideology then maps on. So re-outlined. So you invite people to be a Christian, and then somebody, or I guess the pastor, communicates that it's going to create an in and out group dynamic.
It's going to create an in and out group, and now those who do not identify as Christian will not feel safe in like Sunday school anymore, and like I will treat them differently. Well, that was one of the accusations, is that I would treat them differently, and that there was no way for me to not treat them differently.
So what do you do when you're like with being an evangelical church? What does evangelism then automatically turn into?
Yeah. I mean, I have no clue. I mean, like I said, this was something, now looking back on it, especially after talking with the associate pastor, which like this pastor, even though he was like older, he had gone to Gordon Conwell. Like this was not a young pastor implementing this. He was near retirement age. And so he had gone to Gordon Conwell. Like these are like the bastions of evangelical, like the best kind of evangelical MDiv that you can get. Right.
Yeah.
And I would say
Tim Keller went to Gordon Conwell.
Right. Tim Keller went to Gordon Conwell. Lots of great people have in the past. Yeah, I think like our Midwestern friend, I don't know if I can call him my friend, but Sam Tiedemann, like he went to a church there that had lots of Gordon Conwell professors and connections whenever he was in Boston. Yeah. Which shows you how long I've been watching the internet. Like I don't know him, but I know that about him, like that. Like it's like, oh, okay.
Hey Sam.
Hey Sam. I know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it played out that way. And like I said, it kind of centered on me. And then I was asked to like, in order to become a more inclusive environment to where the kids who were now not identifying as Christians, because it was like, in my opinion, they weren't not identifying as Christians, but that's how it was perceived. It was like, and even in conversations with them, they were fine. It was just like, I'm not ready to make that decision. Right. This is how it works in a Baptist context, is like some kids get baptized and some kids don't. And you just wait until maturity or whatnot. And most of them had not really been taught anything about the Bible their entire time of coming to church, because there hadn't, in being a church plant, there wasn't like a curriculum or a way to catechize these kids. So they've been being brought to church, but never even going into church because they were just playing basketball outside. So like their parents were going to church, but they weren't going to church. So, or at least they were only going for like the first few songs. And then when the kids, like the younger kids ministry, like nursery ministry was dismissed, they would just go outside and play basketball from like third grade up. Right. So in my opinion, it was like, you guys just don't know, like we're all learning about Jesus and you're learning if this is like a commitment. Like I'm not splitting the group. This is just a normal Baptist thing to do. And it's not political either to me. So, because it was conflated with, like, I knew what I was dealing with because we had been listening to Jordan Peterson and all these people. So I knew what it was whenever it was presented to me. I wasn't like caught off guard with the language or with the safetyism or all those kinds of things, and what safe space really meant. Like I knew what all of those things meant. And so
Jonathan Haidt was talking to him about like the NYU students, 2017, 2018. I mean, a long time ago.
Right. And this will be deep internet archives, but like Barry Weiss had a talk at Chautauqua. I know that sounds really weird, but it was like Barry Weiss at Chautauqua, where on like the 7 words you can't use. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like 7 words. And it was like, she based it off of, from like the 50s and 60s, there were 7 words you could not use on TV as a comedian.
Richard Pryor.
Right, Richard Pryor. And so she based it on that. But then now it's these 7 words that can't be used in our culture, which are basically all of the pseudo woke words before we started calling it woke, and so she mentioned that. So I knew what all of these words meant and how they were being used and deployed, and how I was immediately like being castigated as someone who didn't adopt those words and didn't agree to those words. I was going to now be seen as mean or not loving or all these things. So I took that stand pretty hard. And it was lots of meetings with different levels of church staff, some and or parents of kids. And most of them didn't really know what was going on, or I was the only one who knew. And you're trying to bring people into the loop about what this ideology really is. And you'd have a vote, and almost every single time it would end up on my side, in whatever meeting it was in. But then he would go and triangulate with other people who he already, like I said, had in that reading group, and would come up with another decision, and then you'd have to figure it out. So eventually it was told to me, like, okay, the decision is going to be that you don't teach Sunday school or have them come to church like 2 Sundays out of the month. They go and play basketball, and then you can teach them the Bible the other 2 Sundays a month. And I was like, that wasn't what I was hired to do. These were very clear expectations. This wasn't what the parents want of me to do. Like we've talked with all the youth parents. This is not what they want. And so I waited a couple of months after the initial blow up till it all played out, because I wanted the kids to know I wasn't leaving because of them, because we had become really close at that point in time. And so then I eventually turned in like my resignation letter and left very quietly. Like I didn't have to sign an NDA or anything like that. But a lot of people had already left in the intervening period, especially if they had youth kids. And so I just didn't want to like continue to stoke tensions, because I knew there were some people there that were my age that were coming. Like this was the one place that they'd finally found to worship with as adults. And if I had told them what really took place, then they would be in the same place that we were for the next like 5 years, where it's like we can't find a church to go to, that isn't on one of 2 ridiculous ends of the like cultural poles, So I left very quietly for that reason. So that's why like I basically haven't talked about it or left a tweet or been online about it, is because of the ministry context we were in, but also like my husband's work context, that like if I came out and talked about this, there would be some kind of, ramifications in some way.
So how long ago was all that?
I left there at the end of 2018. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So, in like mid 2019. So at that point we were just like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. It was like 6 months to find this job. So I'm just going to keep doing the thing that I know to do, which is to read and do theology. And we only know non-believers now that we've left this church. Like all the friends that we've made that were believers, we basically don't see them anymore, because we can't see them. Because then they're going to want to talk about the church, and they're going to ask about why I left and all these kinds of things. So guess what? We are missionaries here. This is what we are. And so we just started living our lives like missionaries and inviting people into our home, having dinner around the table with all these people of different worldviews and backgrounds, and kind of doing an estuarial style of conversation and a Jordan Peterson style of biblical interpretation to kind of make it work to them. And we just kept.
Could you give an example of that? Could you give like an example of that, maybe? Like just something.
Yeah. So, like I said, you're just getting around and having a conversation. You're having dinner, and then they'll ask you some kind of question about like being a believer, because like we've got all the good Hobby Lobby goods up, like crosses everywhere, and things like that. Our Christ the Lord is risen today sign, which I still have up. Okay, so like I'm not dissing that, but it just means that they know, like, we don't have to apologize for being Christian. They know we're going to be Christian. They know we're going to pray ahead of time before the meal, all these kinds of things. But in doing that, then they ask questions, right? Because these people aren't like the new atheists where they're trying to like, convince you not to have a belief. It doesn't make any sense to them. Like they've never had a phenomenological experience that made them feel like they needed to be a Christian, So even if it's like, I know nice Christians, I've just never felt like I needed to walk into a church, right? So when you're having those questions of like, why? Like, why have you never felt like that? And, then you're talking about what I've felt. And then they'll ask you some question about the Bible, something that they know about the Bible, right? Well, in my opinion, Genesis is really sexist because, and they'll say something like that. And then you're like, okay, well, let's open it up and look at it and read this. And then I like kind of lay the context of the ancient Near Eastern context and show it to them. And they're like, I never thought about it like that. Right. Like, so you're just doing this as like a natural part of conversation, and you're connecting it to like the frame that already makes sense to them. Does that give you like kind of an idea?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
where you're going in and out of talking about the Bible or whatever thing that they're doing in their life, like sciencey thing that they're doing in their life all the time, right? Like if they work for the EPA, like the Environmental Agency, then you're talking about, the Bible and nature and making those connections, right? So it just is a very natural way to have a conversation, and they were always open to it.
So you're building this community, and this is, pre-COVID?
Pre-COVID, yeah. So it would have been like 2019, yeah. Pre-COVID, and at that point, some of the people, after lingering in the church a little bit longer, had come to us because they now felt like they needed to leave the church because more things were coming just down the pipeline of that ideology being applied in other areas. And so now we're getting some Christians in the mix. So this is where like I said, it's kind of becoming estuarial on its own. And those Christians really want it to become a church because they know that they're not going to be able to find a church. So, and not going to be able to find a church that in like a year is not going to go down the same pipeline. Because you could kind of already see it happening. If people are very astute as Christians and kind of already in the know, they can see that that's happening in evangelical publishing already. It's not getting labeled with the secular labels. It's getting labeled with like Christian terms, but it's the same ideology. So they don't also want to get invested in a church they can tell is already on that trajectory.
As somebody with a, you're in PhD theology, how would you, and you've been steeped in this kind of corner stuff, and how would you distinguish between that being ideology and versus theology? I know this is completely could you hone in on that?
I actually do think it has really deep theological roots, that like a Tom Holland thesis, that it is like an anti-Christianity, but it's borrowed on Christian kind of sensibilities about how to care for the vulnerable and the victim in your midst, and uses all the same language. Like there is an original sin, and that original sin that you cannot overcome and then there's like an elect group. And if you have that original sin, you can't all of a sudden become in the elect group, but through common grace, you can participate and come close to the elect group until that line gets hit, and then you're back out again, right? So that would be kind of like the useful white person to a minority group or something like that. And they're useful only up until the point when they no longer go along with it, and they're back and they have the whiteness problem again, right? Or you have the sin problem again. So I do think that there are lots of ways that theologically it maps on, and why it's a particular American thing. Because Americans, like, if you look at our history, we were a whole bunch of religious extremists who couldn't live in Europe and came over here, basically. At least initially, that's what we were. And so we couldn't make it over there. So we come over here. And so that's why I think we always like kind of go between two really extreme poles and struggle to find some cohesion in the middle. But yeah, Peter Boghossian has a really good chart. Have you seen that?
I've just seen his like street epistemology, and of course, back in the day, critical theories and all that kind of stuff I paid attention to.
Yeah, he has a really good chart, like mapping it as a religion, like where there are these rites of initiation, these rites of cleansing, there's, the reprobate group and the elect group and all these kinds of things. So he's not thinking of it through a particular kind of American religion lens, but it does map on pretty well. If you know American revivalistic culture, when you see that, you're like, that's what it is. Yeah. So I do think that's why it can really be easily appropriated into a church framework, because you already kind of have a religious way of looking at those terms. Yeah.
Okay. So you have people from your old church now, some Christians, non-Christians. There's some estuarial culture taking place. The Christians are wanting a church. So what happens from there?
Yeah. So at that point I was like, okay, I'm not going to do the non-denominational thing, like the solo church plant with the solo church planter. I just don't believe in that. I believe that there needs to be like unity as much as we can strive for unity. So, and I'm kind of becoming the pastor of this thing because this is what I do all day, every day. And I have the time to do that. And so I find a Baptist denomination that would commission a female church planter. That's what he ended up doing. And that kind of took place in 2020. Like, so we still have this group that wants to, and it's gotten back down. It's kind of shrunk because of COVID, naturally because of COVID, but they still want to do this. And so I reach out to this group and kind of tell them what's going on, and this Baptist denomination. And eventually, through like about a year and a half, 2022 is when I got commissioned as a church planter with them, after going back and forth with them for a while and still meeting with our group. But we would have like Easter celebrations, like I said, like these non-believers like still want to do those things, and we would have big Thanksgiving celebrations. So I mean, that's as big as we ever got, but we'd have like 50 or 60 people come out for Easter, and they want to dress up their kids and do a photo booth and do an Easter egg hunt. And so they're fine with the Christianity and all the other ceremony that comes along with wanting to be kind of Christian. So whenever in 2022, whenever it was like, okay, now we're going to officially be church planters, then that's when you kind of get sucked into the, what did you call it? Church plant startup culture? Like you get sucked into the vortex.
Yeah. The church growth, church plant startup culture. Yeah.
Yeah. And that just already constitutionally was not where I was at. Because we are growing slow and intentionally, and a lot of these people either are, again, coming out of a church hurt place, or they've never been to church. And so they're not going to be metrics. They're going to be people. And because of that, you can't use a lot of the books that are written for this, of like, okay, we're going to get our launch team together and have goals, and in 6 months, we're going to launch, and that launch is going to look very corporate with signs and banners and a mail rollout and an email blast and text message chains and all these kinds of things. Like, that just was not going to work. These people are averse to branding. They kind of already have, like I said, they're all educated. They know how it works, how branding and marketing and all these kinds of things work. And if it's something really sacred, there is this sense to people who've never been Christian that like, this isn't right for church. Like they couldn't explain it to you, but they just know that wouldn't be right, which is why they also never felt like church was relevant. Like I would try to describe to them what the average church was like around here, and they're like, it never made sense to them. Like, why would you go to church for it to not feel like church?
So these are non-Christian, pagan secular pluralists, and they are looking at kind of America, big evangelicalism, and and it just doesn't speak religion to them. It speaks like corporate branding and marketing, and so what are the ages of the people that you're talking about right now?
I like mid-40s and younger. Yeah.
Okay.
Unless there's some of the other people who were already Christian and coming along with us, then they might be a little bit older. But those people because they had chosen the church we all knew each other from, they already appreciated liturgy, appreciated sacramentalism, and appreciated not being branded at, because it was like a church of 200 people, right? So they already had chosen and self-selected for a more intentional kind of community in that way. So even the Christians we were with were just not on board with some of those market-driven, efficiency-driven types of methods.
Yeah, it kind of doesn't, I mean, as somebody, when I think about when someone would come up and tell me, man, worship was great this morning, I always was like, were we like really hitting like musically? Like, what does that mean? Yeah. I didn't ever know. I just had to say thank you, but I was like, were you like worship your personal worship, or hey man, that worship thing that you're doing up there, that was really good. Like, I don't know. And then the other piece of it is that just if church, or like you're saying, like what people are, okay, here's what I'm trying to say. Look at what God is doing. How many times have you heard that? Man,
Yeah.
look at what God is doing.
Mm-hmm.
After the email blast, after the text chain, after the social media promotion, after the brand and sign marketing, after, tell all your
The big
friends,
event.
press everyone on your Facebook group.
Mm-hmm.
Man, look at what God is doing.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is it's almost the same feeling of, hey, Christian, worship was great today. It's like, yeah, I mean, we had our A team up there. Is that what you mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
That's
and I know what it's like to be B team because I was like youth minister. So like everybody, when you're B team.
we had the good drummer this Sunday, and we had the really good guitar player, and the sound guy. We had our best sound guy. Guess what? It was great today. So keep going.
Well, and even if so there's I'm gonna throw out some real inside baseball. So there's Church of the Highlands ARC, Association of Related Churches, kind of church planting. And then there's Acts 29 TGC style church planting. And the Acts 29 would suggest
TGC,
the way that they brand
the Gospel
Coalition. Gospel Coalition. Yeah. The way that the TGC Acts 29 brands themselves is we're the intellectual Christians. We're the ones who do theology well, and we're still reaching the culture well. We're doing cultural apologetics and those kinds of things well. And then the ARC, Church of the Highlands stream is we church plant, their model is launch big, right? So you're going to raise $250,000 to do a church plant, and you're going to have an 18-wheeler where all of your equipment fits in those music cases and can be rolled out all at one time and set up within 10 minutes and all those kinds of things, because you're going to launch big, and it's going to be an event. It's going to be a production every single weekend, and the lights will be blinding in your face. And the thing is TGC or Acts 29 makes it seem like we're not like them, right? And they make it seem like we're not like them because we're not getting bogged down in theology. We're just making the gospel real to people. We're just ministering to people where they're at, right? So they both have this kind of oppositional kind of way that's what kind of church planter do I want to be? And then I align myself with one of those types of models. However, whenever you experience it in person, which I would say those are the two predominant church cultures here, it feels exactly the same. It feels just as branded. It feels just as much like the lights are coordinated. One just might have slightly more thoughtful songs that they sing, and they're going to be preaching from the Bible a little bit more explicitly. But in terms of the frictionless church culture, where you're going to come in and you're going to grab coffee on your way in and take it straight into the sanctuary and drink it the whole time. You worship like this, because you're still holding your coffee. It still is that thing, that vibe, that feel. And that's not a problem for the people that it works for. But like I said, that doesn't make sense to people who are not Christian, right? And the slogan that often gets said is we want to make church not feel like church. And why would you be going to church if it doesn't feel like church? That doesn't make sense.
We want to make church that doesn't feel like church. So yeah, that's been a long journey, church that doesn't feel like church. This is a question I've been asking is, why do you think, the cultural response of the 60s and 70s to kind of that spirit, but was there any validity to that? That's the question I have related to this, but also is there, but then you see tell us of that, 60 years, 70 years later, and you're kind of oof. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Was there validity to changing things so radically? Is that what you're saying?
Or what was, I don't know. Yeah.
So, it kind of goes back to some of your discussions with Kale, or even one of the things that they said at Midwestuary was if the Catholic Church was so great prior to Vatican II, then why did the spirit of Vatican II overrun every Catholic church within 4 years, And some of that could have been it really wasn't as great as we thought as Catholics beforehand. But I also think there was just this cultural zeitgeist that that there is this American spirit. Again, it's the frontier spirit. that there always is going to be something new. Like progress is always an inherent good. And so therefore,
I talked to Aaron about that, or he talked to me.
It's crazy because like I learned that in like college history classes, that how much like frontier theology like really affected the way that Americans did everything, and like
manifest destiny.
And you know, like my great grandparents for sure thought that their children were going to have a better life than them, and then my grandparents thought that their children were going to have a better life than them, and my parents have thought the same of us. And we've struggled in ways that like they would look at us and they don't think that we're struggling, but it's like objectively, if you look at every metric, we just don't have the life that they had in the 90s. Like the 90s was like this mytho America that was peak America. Like we're never going to get better America almost than the 90s. Like it was everything that the founders had hoped for, and here it is. And then after that, like 9/11 happens and it crumbles really quickly. So I think that like people our age are wanting to go back to that church that was like 70s and 80s, like before it was different, and or the church that they grew up in. Like they want that. And so they aren't actually looking to overturn the previous generation and the wisdom that they handed down to us. Like if they're still in church, like they want it to be that. And I think there's a couple reasons why. I just talk to friends about this all the time, or other ministry, like friends in ministry or lay people friends. But the easiest way I have to like describe this is like when my grandmother died, she had dementia. So obviously like she struggles to remember people and things and all that kind of stuff. But they had called us in because they knew it was close. And like, hey, you need to come home. And so within a few days of me leaving there and coming back to North Carolina, she had passed. But we go down there and it's a Saturday. It's not Sunday, right? But she's like, I want to go to church. And so we make a joke. Everybody's there. We make a joke and we're having a big like family cookout party kind of thing. And we're like, oh, you know, Mama, it's not Sunday. It's not time for church. And she's like, I don't care. Church is any day. Right. So she's like, Courtney's going to say something. Courtney's going to say something and we're going to sing. And I was like, okay, that's what we're going to do. So then I almost can't not cry thinking about this. But then as we sing, we let her choose the songs that she wants to sing. And of course, it's like Amazing Grace. It's all these songs that we know. But everybody knows them. You know, me, my aunts, my cousins, my second cousins, like everybody's come to be there near the end of her life and have this big family party. Like, I mean, it was a party. We had hamburgers and hot dogs and grilled out and cake and all the things, you know, because we knew this was near the end. Everybody knew them. And if you were constantly pursuing a new thing and you're constantly innovating, then the faith that made my grandmother a Christian is no longer accessible to me. The faith that made me a Christian is no longer accessible to me, right? And it's not accessible to my kids. Like, they're not going to sing Amazing Grace. They're not going to know those lyrics. They're not going to be able to sing them at my deathbed together, right? And that was in 2019 as well for me. So experientially, then I really knew why liturgy mattered. This was why. It's because it's a faith that's been passed down through the generations. And if you think about like our formation, mine and yours, in this world, we've had probably 3 major worship changes in my 35 years of living.
Yeah. And
not only are they worship changes, but it's like we don't even sing the same songs we sang 5 years ago, or we don't even use the same methods that we did 5 years ago. And it's not just that they've like become outdated and outmoded, and that's why we don't do them. We also judge them as like we were idiots for doing that 5 years ago. Look at how cringe that was, right?
I'm going to break in and share a little personal, which that was a beautiful story. I'm just going to talk about my church's liturgy. Because we started, you know, in some similar reasons, not exactly, almost like instead of the DEI, the Mars Hill side of things, like those are like the two spirits, you know, that, was what basically And so we have this organ. It's like the oldest organ in our town. There's recitals from the local college. They use it, this kind of thing. Beautiful. So here's a funny story. So speaking of ARC churches, a guy from my town is like the creative director for the biggest ARC church network in the state. And he commented on, I posted a picture outside of our church building, and he's like, that's the best sounding building that I've ever performed in my entire life. And he's like a tech, music guru. And, I think he took guitar maybe at the local college, and they maybe had some recitals there. And I was like, yeah, we don't use any reverb. It's like just all amazing. And so I was like, it's really important we figure out how to use this organ, but we don't even know how anybody that knows how to play the organ.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like I'm playing a track as our prelude that's organ. And it's like an old hymn, old melody, kind of shockingly, kind of discomforting to hear an organ in the context. But that's the prelude. And then for our processional, which is very mild, it's something like, here I am to worship. How great is our God?
Mm-hmm.
It's like in that zone, because I'm trying to like press the brakes, and it's not cringe because everybody knows it.
It's not cringe because these are the songs that formed our faith.
Yeah. And so okay. And then the songs that we do, modern hymnic stuff, usually something where, a psalm is called worship. But yeah, I mean, that is
Sandra McCracken style.
Yes.
Like modern hymns.
Getty type stuff, and some of the Hillsong stuff that's more hymnic related. There's certain things like that, but but it's very simple. It's just guitar and a piano and a violin or whatever. And the violin doesn't even use a microphone because it's like you can hear it in the building. It's crazy. Anyways, to your point, like that has been the response in the sense. And I had a conversation. It was a hard and a painful conversation related to these things. And it was basically, I was like, am I just, okay, these Elevation has Stephen Furtick and their worship leader guy, and then Brandon Lake and Leland and Maverick City dude, Chance, I can remember his name. They're doing this new collective. And there's also this stuff that the new songwriting collectives in CCM are basically dominated by these guys, and that the women are actually being pushed out. Mm-hmm. Brooke Frazier is the only one that's in the top 5 or generally recently. And they've moved from the Hillsong Elevation things because corruption, and they're moving into these, and a lot of it apparently is being orchestrated network-wise by Brandon Lake. And Brandon Lake recently had a viral TikTok that said, we need to quit. What if you're singing Holy, Holy, Holy on a Sunday and Bubba walks in, he's not going to understand that theology. You need to be singing to him. Whose song should we be singing, Brandon? You tell me. But even like that particular song of the triune rightness of God, like doxologically, I'm like, how can, like that's like wild to think about, that we need that needs to be, second guessed in service of basically the next and the new. And and I was just like, when am I going to hop off the trend train? That was my question. I was like, but am I just supposed to keep watching the trends of that I've been on since I was 15 and I'm 40? Am I just supposed to stay on this trend train? Like, and that's the method that goes along with the church in a box that you were talking about earlier. And so those are, the type, and I'm like, these old melodies, like you were saying, like one of my arguments related to organ was related to these melodies are melodies that these kids may never hear the rest of their life. That was like the bedrock. I was like, I think that's important. Related. So that's on the musical side of things, apart from like the other liturgical aspects. But I just, to your point, I feel that very deeply. And your story was really moving related to that, because like how can we sing, and what does it turn into when it's a new song? It turns into performance, because then you're just like, it's content that you're taking in because you can't participate.
Right.
So,
like you don't know it well enough to sing along with it. And the amount of time it takes you to begin to know it well enough, then you're already on to a new song.
yes, exactly. Because from the worship leader perspective, now he's practiced that song 15 times before he plays it. The band has practiced it 5 to 10 times before they've played it once, and you hear it once as a congregant. And the third time they played it, that's like, again, like we're talking 50 times for everybody, and then the church has heard it twice. Right. And it's like, oh, did you hear this new banger by X, Y, and Z? And it's like, let's get that. Oh, yeah. And so, like that whole thing. And I do think that even within that, there is some internal critique taking place right now within the culture. But anyways, let's keep going with your.
Yeah, no, I do think there is some internal critique, and you'll see like certain, like Gavin Ortland or people within that sphere who are arguing for kind of recovering some type of Baptist historicity and things like that. So it happens, but then if you desire it, like what are you as a layperson supposed to do? Like you can't stop that machine.
What are you supposed to do if you're like a theological leader in a denomination and you're trying to help that?
Are you pushing me to the next step? Yeah. Yeah, you can't really, even if, as a pastor, if like that's what your music minister wants to do, like you couldn't really stop it. I don't think that.
Say more to that point.
So every church planter, this is after being in the church planting world for like, 2 years or 2.5 years. Every church planter's existential dread is their music person, in both the positive and negative sense, because they know, they know they will not be able to plant a successful church without a music person, but they also don't know where to find that music person, usually. And because of the way that a lot of music pastors have been formed, which is not the way that you were, Christian, I don't know exactly, but you're just super thoughtful. It's very hard to find someone who's thoughtful about that and who isn't chasing the trend. So even if you are a pastor who, because this would happen with me on some youth retreats that I would like, where, we're planning the youth retreat. And so we are bringing in a worship band to lead the youth retreat. So you're doing all of the planning, and you're wanting to make it liturgical. You're wanting to do all of these things. And you have the ways that the songs that you want to sing that incorporate into all of these things. It still was hard to get that band to play it the way you wanted to play it. Because our church, like we had an organ, like in Birmingham, we had an organ. This is what like our kids are formed into. This is what they're used to hearing. And like, they still would try to like modernize that hymn in a way that like these kids aren't used to singing it at that tempo or singing it in that way. So then they don't sing it.
Yeah.
Even if they're going to sing the hymn. Right. So as a church planter, you're like, I need a music person, because it doesn't matter how good I preach or how good I connect community or something. If I don't have music, then the people are going to go to the church down the street.
Because the music, even in the lowest form, is the liturgical binding, which we've already established in the story about your grandmother. But the music's the liturgical binding. Yep. And in Baptist and evangelicalism, that's all. That's at this point, that's basically all you have for liturgical binding. And yet, when there's this trend or trend cycle, it's like that's thinning out. Even that's its power to do that. And you're kind of less than with your content consumption. Right.
And then the other way to kind of that some church plants deal with that is just to hire out musicians, some of whom might not even be Christian. So a large part of some church plants budgets that I know is to like hire musicians to come in and just like 5 people. Like, I mean, it isn't even a great band, right? Because they can't afford a great band. It's like maybe 3 people. It might only just be like drums, a piano, and a guitar. And so it still doesn't sound great, but these are people you're having to pay because you just don't have the people to do them and the volunteers to do them. And the amount of time it takes to produce that music on stage, it's like you said, it's a ton of practice. So I would say that keeps most church planters up more than almost anything is the music.
Wow. Interesting.
So even if you want to be liturgical, it's kind of hard.
What if you're on the flip side of that, where you're like, you're maybe your sensibilities are too liturgical for said perceived what might be successful as a church plant, but the other, like, I'll just bring back another story to your point. I've been working on staff part-time with like the local congregants playing the music, and it was rough. Like they, you know, the value was for contemporary worship, not like good music. And those are two different things.
Those are two different things.
So my value was for really good music. That was what was for me. You know, I'm watching Hillsong and Passion. I was like, that's what I wanted. Chris Tomlin, whoever. I was like, I want to make professional music. And so the people that would come through my band locally in this town, because I was at church, at a place I grew up in, and a lot of the guys that I went to high school with that started a band, or we do stuff in college, or they go work 8-10 weeks of church camp with me in the summer, and we get real tight and all this stuff. Well, I'm like at this church, independent church plant. Well, there's a Southern Baptist church plant across. Weird. I just got kicked out completely.
Oh, weird. Yeah.
And so I was saying there's this other church plant, and they are contracting all the guys from my band at the other church. So on Sunday, I'm with like my kind of homie church people. Every Sunday, my guitar player, my drummer, my bass player that I travel with are at a church across town. And they didn't live there. You know, they were being brought in from an hour and a half away, different directions. And so living these examples, you know.
Well, I know it probably sounds like, especially now that I'm Orthodox, like, oh man, she was like super liturgical and she's trying to do something uber traditional or something like that. But like the church that we moved here and were initially hired in, it was like they're singing some contemporary songs. It's just like there is an intentional structure form to like, it would have been a lot more like what your liturgy is describing right now. And I thought like, wow, this is amazing. Okay. Like, so I wasn't judging kind of what your form is right now. It's like, I just want us to think like that about the way we're structuring the service. You know, when we would meet, we would talk for like an hour and a half about all those things whenever I was at that church. And we were thinking like that about the kind of formation we're doing. And over the long term, if somebody's here for 10 years with their kids, like, what is that? What are they going to be formed to do? Right. So I it's not like it all needs to be Eastern Orthodox chant or it's not liturgy. Okay. So I don't want people to think I'm like that, or even as like just a super traditional Anglican church or something like that. Like I was, as a Baptist, like any liturgy was like amazing to me. So it was just you're kind of swimming against the tide and you can feel it. And even if you're just swimming against the tide in your own little church with your one music person, or you're swimming against the tide in your denomination, you're swimming against the tide and you feel it. And you kind of sound like a weirdo for thinking like this. And even thinking that there's something from the past that we should still be doing.
So I know it's part of your story. You were, you got up on stage at Midwest Estuary and you, and you asked a question, maybe not initially. You made a statement about AI and then you turned it into a question in response to Elizabeth Olsfield. What was the question?
No, I asked the question first and then she was like, can you give me context for that? So then I told the story. Yeah.
So, but to get to that point, like the discussion was kind of around AI. Well, no, this was the comment section. People just kind of rapid fire with the panelists, the speakers from the conference. But
yes.
You know,
but AI was definitely the big talk of that conference.
Yes. And so related to this corner of the internet and what we've kind of been hitting on without getting there is this kind of spirit of the machine related to, you know, when we talk about church growth, startup culture, that's, you know, this kind of entrepreneurial, and that's really comes out of like the Silicon Valley, move quick, boom, like, and we're talking metrics and all these things, things that you can count, experience, and then like subjective experience. But then the next kind of piece of this is what's now happening related to technology, because I even saw it like going from, like you were saying, if you had like 3 musicians and they were playing and it was okay, but then all of a sudden they create this technology for digital tracks, right? That you're on the click track, and the click track's connected to the MIDI trigger, and the MIDI trigger is connected to the Pro Presenter. Pro Presenter is also connected to the light cues. And you press go, and every song is like, and it's the machine that's running that. It's not a human liturgy. It's a machine-driven one.
Right.
So that's where I begin to experience that, and there's like a complete disconnect between, you're like in this whole other world that the congregation's not a part of. And that's like, oh man, but this is going to reach people, because if you do it with excellence, that's going to get more people here. And then there's this whole like, and number go up. There's nothing wrong as long as number go up. And so that's like this scaling. And so now you tack on AI, you tack on virality, digital, and we were talking about friction earlier, and we're just like, we're removing layers of friction between people's their access to content, if you're a content driven ministry, if you want to call it however we want to talk about these things. And as I've thought about, I kind of had this about a year ago. I was like, well, I saw this, I don't know if it was real or not, but it was like church in the metaverse. And there was all these little avatars, and it was through Saddleback, which we've already mentioned earlier in this conversation. And you could see the worship band up on a screen inside this weirdly digital church building. And there's these little freaky looking people all around, and it's metaverse church, and they're there. Yeah. And it hit me instantly. I was like, well, if you don't have anything that ties you to something real theologically, which it opened my eyes to what I began to call sacramental ontology, which I heard Roger mention while we were at Midwest Estuary as well, that if you don't have something, if you don't believe something real has to happen within creation, like organic, not digital, like carbon versus silicon, actually, then you don't have a reason to be here in what I mean by meat space, carbon space.
Right.
So, I had come that, and then when you start talking about what you saw within the denomination that you were previously part of, their kind of methods related to AI, and how they were pushing this as a method of doing ministry using AI, best practice for the church to reach people, number go up. Can you share the details of that experience?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't want it to seem like I'm bashing them at all, because they supported me and the ragtag group of people that we had meeting with us at a time when like nobody else, we had no other support. And I like monthly met with people, like with a coach who talked with me about all the things we're facing and helped us strategize. And then, kind of bi-monthly met with other leaders in our area, all those kinds of things. So I had tons of like relational support. And even though we were doing this weird thing with this group of people, they never put pressure, even though we're talking about church growth, startup culture, they never put pressure on me to do that. They were like, you're doing something different. So it's like whenever you're experiencing the church growth startup culture is like when you go to a conference or whenever you go to your national denominational meeting, but like on the ground interpersonally, I never felt like I had to become something I didn't want to be. So I don't want it to seem like I'm bashing them. Like they really supported us at a time when we really couldn't find other Christians who were thinking about these things and caring about these things. And we were just weirdos ministering to other weirdos. And it was a good space. Yeah, exactly. So I don't want it to seem like that. However, because I would think about these things and talk about these things with my church planting coach or district minister or things like that, they're like, we need like more people just need to hear what Courtney's talking and thinking about, because any one of these ideas that we're talking about right now, I've just read almost every book I could read on that topic, whether it's theology or any of these things, philosophy, the secular ideologies happening in our culture, because I just really needed to understand it because it was my life and this was what was happening. And I was trying to help people begin to experience God for the first time when they never had a world where they experienced God before, right? So you're kind of beginning to do the discipleship again. And so that's whenever I became more rigidly liturgical, because it was like, okay, what did the early church do to get these like pagans to become Christians, and you see how they're doing it, and it's becoming this more embodied practice. So you're like, okay, I've been able to live in propositional land for a long time because I lived in a culture that just naturally embodied these things. So what mattered were the propositions, because we just kind of naturally do love each other and take care of each other because we're all going to church all the time, right? So then I had to figure out how to get these people who didn't have church culture and where we don't live in a culture where these things are saturated to begin to embody these practices. And whenever you do that, then that is when the liturgical world really opens up to you. So my denomination was like, she's thinking about this in a cool way. And so they invited me on the denominational podcast, and I was like a regularly recurring guest on there. So like about 2/3 of like the episodes that were recorded, I'd be on there, whether it was like, if we were just talking about a topic and how we might approach that in ministry, or we're interviewing someone that like runs a parachurch ministry that could help ministers in our denomination. So then last year, whenever I went to our denominational conference, it was like, I mean, like Paul Kingsnorth would not be able to make it in and out of that place. Like it was straight machine from beginning to end. And it was at a mega church within our denomination. And of course, this building doesn't look like a church from the outside. There was nothing that looked like a religious symbol on the outside or inside of the building. And people even commented like, oh, I've got lobby envy. This makes me feel like we're in an airport, as if that's like
a compliment.
A good thing.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this is just totally global urban monoculture right here, you know, because you've got the like coffee shop with the garage doors that open up to the outside. And, you know, so if it's a nice day, you could have like inside, outside workspace and co-workspace and those kinds of things. But it began with an AI robot worship intro, like the whole conference did, which was like scary to me, where the speaker, like there's like a video of the speaker entering into ChatGPT, you know, create this kind of like a video to go along with my sermon, you know, that's introduced by like a robot that looks like a person, you know, something like that. So then the robot, like this video starts, and it is a robot that looks like a person. And the only way you can tell it's a robot is because like some weird uncanny valley things at that moment in time that let you know it's not a person. But then she starts talking and she still sounds like a robot. And it's like, welcome to, you know, this conference 2024. And she told us to look under our seats, and we grabbed like a light up bracelet that coordinated with the worship so we could like all do this. And we start by singing like the YMCA so we could figure out how the light up bracelets work. But there was a couple of things that happened at that conference. One of the breakout sessions, like whenever you go, it's sage on stage and then breakout sessions with people who might lead something that's pertinent to your ministry. But one of our leaders in our denomination was like a beta tester for Apple glasses. And like one of them was like how to lead church in the metaverse. Like that was like, or how to lead virtual reality church and church planting. And then another one was when the question that I asked on stage was that, like, if we continue to upload church into the machine, like we then have what I called a simulacrum of the sacred, where we think we are doing things to participate with God, but then like we are kind of deceiving ourselves into a certain type of worship that really isn't worship anymore. Like, when do we hit the golden calf incident in what we're doing? And actually, I think it's worse than the golden calf incident, because the golden calf didn't look like God, but we can make these avatars look like Christ, right? Or look like God. So the other thing that happened was there's like this guy who is a consultant, and he has a book on like how to leverage AI in your church. And obviously he's saying you should use AI to write your sermons. I mean, we had that like right in front of us. Is like the first thing that we saw was AI writing sermons and creating videos to do for your sermons. But then one thing that he mentioned, and this was the thing that kind of like made the room drop at Midwestuary, was that you could upload your sermon and teaching videos into like a deepfake AI, create an avatar of yourself. And then that way you can create videos quicker to go along with your sermon or intro your sermon, or it could go in people's email inbox and be like a 5-minute devotional at the beginning of every day to go along with the sermon series. But then, you know, one of the like downstream suggestions was like eventually like people would be able to chat with you, because they kind of like your avatar is trained on what you would say and what you've taught over however many years. And so if someone's going through a crisis or would like pastoral care, then they can just chat with your avatar. And I was kind of the only one that like saw an issue with any of what was like happening, you know. And whenever I mentioned it later after the conference to like my district minister and my coach, they're like, oh, well, that's Arizona. They always go big, you know. Like that's just like the West Coast, you know, mega church culture or something like that, you know. But there wasn't really a way to talk theologically about it being a problem without sounding like a fuddy-duddy or a Luddite, you know.
Well, there isn't if you don't have a sacramental ontology.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can say.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's the lifeboat to reality, not
Right.
virtual reality. And so
Yeah.
we have to start taking that very seriously, no matter what tradition you're in. And so, because if you don't believe that something can only really happens here, well, not even here, I mean like where I'm at or where you're at, not here,
Mm-hmm.
not here.
Yeah.
You know, that there's certain things that can't happen here.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this, you know, like this, you know, infinite progress that you were talking about, this infinite frontier. At some point, like the frontier, it becomes not human,
Mm-hmm.
and disconnected from something incarnated, I guess. Would it be, you know,
Mm-hmm.
when I was talking about carbon versus silicon earlier, I remember when I was taking anatomy and physiology, and my professor, who's this great, I mean, I'm at this little community college here in Arkansas, and he was just so excellent. And he kind of had this little sci-fi moment one time when we were talking about being carbon-based, and he said, you know, some people theorize that there could be silicon-based life forms because carbon and silicon are right next to each other on the periodic table. And you know, basically everything we're doing right now is silicon-based.
Mm-hmm.
Silicon Valley. I mean, you got to think about that. And
Right.
you know, the transhuman vision, talking about a pastor, denominational leader being on the board for research related to Google Glass.
Yeah.
You know,
Beta tester. Yeah.
yeah, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the ideas of what is, and without saying, so when
And
I say
it's also talked about like as in laudatory terms, like, oh, you know, so then he tested it and he sent back a whole bunch of feedback for Apple to like get better at this, you know, like this is like a thing that's like good.
Well, right now, Christian music is taking over the music charts. And the reason is because it's the last vestige of liturgy in our culture. We've lost movie night, or, you know, like our TV shows. Everyone's siloed except for Sunday morning. It's a weird thing that's taking place right now because these Christian artists whose songs get sung on Sunday, or that are in like this, Christianity is kind of this last, like, well, everyone's at least coming around this thing, whatever. And it's trying to get married to kind of the transhuman thing right now. And the music is a big part of it because that's what I saw on that metaverse screen in Saddleback, because it's like, oh, I can go do church here. And what I mean by sacramental ontology, I don't have to explain this to you, but I'll explain it more clearly. Sacraments is that there is a way in which God's grace happens through something here that physical. God's grace happens through physical means.
Right. Matter and spirit interpenetrate. Yeah.
And, you know, we haven't, and if we have a few minutes now, you know, that was actually a question that I sat down when I at breakfast one morning and talked to John Verveke, was about transjectivity being our relationship basically to the sacraments, from his language about subjective, objective, and the relationship that we have in between. And, you know, so he's like coming at it from this, and he was like, yes.
Yeah.
But anyways, I don't, you know, could we bring in this kind of last, you know, 15 minutes or so, maybe how John Verveke's work, because you sent me one of your papers on how John Verveke's work coincides with everything that we're talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, that was a real wake up call for me, just like at my denominational conference. And the reaction that I had, like I said, was not the reaction everybody else had. However, at Midwestuary, everybody had a very similar reaction to me. And it was like news. And even to you, it was news, because you're like, oh, these were things I thought were coming. And or they're fringe, like you're seeing them individual people kind of getting sucked into AI psychosis. But this is basically like a denomination kind of pushing, saying we should be doing this. Like it's leading people into doing this, because the rhetoric is, the church is always 5-10 years behind culture. If we don't do this, then we're going to lose relevance. Right. However, the most relevant thing that we have is our bodies. Like this is a thing that's going to be with me until I die, you know? And so that's why sacramental ontology, as you were talking about, is so important. If people want like a theological resource for this that's Protestant, you know, I'm not trying to make everybody become Orthodox or something like that. Hans Bersma has several really good books related to this. There's multiple ones. There's like, you know, sacramental preaching, like, and he's got the kind of sacramental worldview too, heavenly participation.
John Williamson Nevin, the mystical.
Yeah, John Williamson Nevin in the Presbyterian tradition. He and Philip Schaff are the ones who edited the like early patristic commentary series that you'll see in most theologians, like the back of their, you know, their library behind them. And so it exists within the Protestant tradition. It's just you have to go looking for it. In fact, the early Baptists were sacramental and would talk about communion as a means of grace and baptism as a means of grace. And the reason for this is because we are embodied creatures. Like we were made to be in our body. Our body is not a problem that needs to be overcome. It's just that our body is dying. And Christ conquered death with his own death and was resurrected. So therefore, our body is really important, and we are going to have a resurrected body at the end of all time. Right. So what happens whenever we die now is not the end of the story. Like when our spirit is separated from our body. N.T. Wright calls it the life after death, like where we're resurrected again. So right now we experience life after death, where like our body and our spirit are separate, but those are going to come back together. And because of that, we were created where matter and spirit, our body and spirit, interpenetrate. Like from Genesis chapter 2, God breathed into man and he became a living being or a living soul, right? So that is who we were created to be. And therefore, the means by which we encounter God in our world and always have encountered God in our world is through matter, right? And so we encounter the spirit of all spirits through the means in which God has given to us. And there have been different means throughout the biblical storyline. There have been different means. But all of those means prefigure to the ones that like Christ initiates in the Lord's Supper and also at the Mount of Olives when he gives the commission for baptism. So those are the two main means that Christ has given to us to experience objective grace, which is really important. And it's like, I know we don't want to get into the objective versus subjective, but it is important that like, how do I know that it isn't just a feeling that I'm conjuring up, that it is an emotion that I'm conjuring up? It's because Christ is transjectivity, right, is coming to us through these means that he's given to us, where matter and spirit interpenetrate. And so Verveke is really important for that, especially like his talk. When his talk is dropped, people go and watch that, where he talks about the imaginal space, that space between objectivity and subjectivity, or the participatory, is where we actually encounter our world, right? And that's the most important thing. So if you have his 4 Ps, where it's like the propositional, the procedural, the perspectival, and the participatory, it's like you want to reach that state of flow, the participatory state. And the way that you do that is by continuing to learn how to, and the procedural, and the why, the propositional, in order to reach that flow state. And as like a former athlete, like I played college soccer and things like that, like that's exactly what you do. You don't learn how to, or college football, that's another one, being from Alabama. It's like those guys don't get out there and run that play. That play is a procedure. It has a form that it's supposed to go according to. But they don't get out there and do that the first time, like you were saying with music. Like you don't get out there and play it for the first time not having practiced it. And you're going to make a ton of mistakes as you go through practicing it. But whenever you get out there and you perform, you're going to reach this flow state where you do things that you never thought were possible to do. And it's those like moments where it's like, man, I made that goal, or I caught that touchdown pass, or we played that song where like we just were all in the groove. And we know what that moment is. And that flow state really is that sacramental participatory space. And so liturgy is doing the same unvaried ritual over and over and over again. And there are going to be times where it's boring. There are going to be times where it doesn't like hit. But then that means that whenever you hit that flow state, then you know you've had an experience of God. Because these are kind of the means by which the Christian tradition has passed down to us so that we can tell the good spirit versus all the bad spirits. This is the way the Christian tradition has given us to discern the spirits, as in like 1 John. So Verveke's model like exactly overlaps onto liturgical formation. The way that you come to learn anything is a liturgy.
Yes. And Peugeot has been talking about fractal liturgies forever. Yeah, with that as well, you know, the dinner table and so on. Yeah, so all of this, you know, you walk up to me and you shake my hand, hey, I've listened to the podcast, and we just like, boom, whoa, you see this, and it's because of our perspectival. Our whole perspective is very similar in how we were raised and where we're now at, and being influenced by this corner of the internet, and how that then orients our attention towards our, you know, previous traditions, and how that, and I think that the experience of meeting a fellow sojourner that it, you know, has moved away from that tradition, but not because you don't have great love, and it's not because you even hate it or anything like that. And so that was, you know, it was a very good thing. And so, you know, we've covered a lot, the AI thing. I don't know, was there anything else you're wanting to maybe bring into this conversation? We've got just a few more minutes to kind of like, to kind of bring it down, some closing thoughts or anything like that.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's like anything else that I absolutely need to share, but all of that, like I said, all of this like wandering and thinking through theology, thinking about formation, from both like the cognitive science space and this little corner to like getting really deep into theology and kind of church history as it relates to these things. Oh, we didn't talk about the Heiser pipeline. So the other pipeline, like people were like, where have you been? Well, my little corner of the little corner has been basically the Heiser pipeline. Because I, in 2021, started a business teaching Greek and Hebrew online, which if we're talking about the bivocationalism, that's where the teaching languages came back, and all of those skills that I learned to teach French with are now to teach people biblical Greek and Hebrew online. And we have people from all kinds of traditions in our class, which is also why I don't feel like I ever need to convince somebody to come to my side. It's like I already kind of have to exist in this metagelical space, which I don't love the term, but that's it just is a thing. But I've already
paid homage to old PVK somehow.
We'll pay homage for sure. And so I started doing that, and that really got me deep into like the academic scholarship side of things and the theology side and biblical studies side. And as a result of needing to like advertise my business to the people who like voluntarily want to pay to teach Greek, to learn Greek and Hebrew online, there's this alternative pipeline through like the Bible Project to Michael Heiser to Lord of the Spirits into Orthodoxy. So it was never going to be like, Peugeot was never going to get me there. Okay. As much as I love Peugeot, I'm like, oh, I've been doing that in my tradition for a long time. And I've had this symbolic worldview because of the Hebrew Bible for a long time, like my entire growing up childhood. And it was really kind of in digging deep into like scripture and biblical studies that really kind of was like one of the things that allowed me to see Orthodoxy for really the benefit that it was. And if you're looking for a sacramental ontology that is more communal, because I eventually realized we can't do this church thing. We can't really be the only ones doing this. Even if my denomination is going to let us do it. It's like we need more than us because we live in a very transient place. And so if these kids go off to college or these people move away, what church do I send them to? Where do I tell them they're going to find another church like this, you know? And it's not going to exist. And I was the only one who wanted to stay Baptist. Like, you know, I was basically the only one who wanted to stay Baptist because this was like where my career was. This is where I was formed. This is the heritage that I would like to uphold because that's the faith that formed me. But everybody else didn't have that like hindrance. They were ready for just church, you know? or even if they're not ready for church, if they're going to begin to experiment with it, like I said, they don't get a church that's trying not to be church. They're like, why don't we just do that? Because it's already adding enough new things into their life. So when we started needing to advertise on YouTube for Greek and Hebrew, that's whenever I kind of started doing we did podcasting on our own channel with our business. And through that got invited into like podcasters who are more in that biblical study space. And so like the people I chat with regularly, they're those kind of people, but they're all following the Verveke Peugeot thing too. It's just they're incorporating it more into a biblical study space. And there are people who are Orthodox and people who are not Orthodox, but it's kind of like the podcasters in that space all have a chat. We all chat all the time and talk about these things. So that's where I hang out mostly on the internet, is in that space. And it is like an alternative pipeline that does overlap, but is not the same as the Peterson Peugeot pipeline. Yeah.
PVK corner. So
yeah,
the piece, one of the parts of this that I just want to add in here real quick at the end is that you asked me to try to introduce you to Jordan Hall, and we were able to make that introduction. And when we kind of basically, you shared kind of some of those things you'd seen, he goes, oh yes, the techno-theocracy.
Techno-theocracy. Yeah.
And I was like,
I know that term. He's like, oh yeah, it's just that. And you're like,
of course it is. But
I've been trying to figure out what it was for like years, man.
And it was like, oh yeah. And he's like, yeah. And it hit recently, it's something that he was experiencing. So that was a really cool moment. And so Courtney, thank you for coming on and meet me in this space. And I look forward to hearing and getting feedback from people, getting exposed to this part of the corner that we've been chirping on about here over the last year or so. And so anyways, it's been really encouraging, and I hope that this is really helpful to people out there. And a lot of the stuff that we've covered, I've written kind of on the Substack. So I'm going to post that in the comments. Is there anywhere you want to point people to digitally?
Yeah. So like you can check us out at kairosclassroom.com if you want to learn Greek and Hebrew. We kind of alluded to this, beginning a PhD program in the Old Testament embodied theophanies of God, right? Because this body problem is really important to me and how that connects to the sacramental life. So I'm going to be thinking about all these things. Like that question didn't come from nowhere. It came from all of this journey, but also the academic questions I'm going to be like searching it and looking into, diving into. So hopefully eventually there'll be things being published about that that you can find. But right now, that's like the only place that exists on the internet. I was a millennial who didn't learn how to do Facebook until like 2021. So that's the only other like app I know how to run on the internet, So I have an internet company, but don't know how to internet.
What was it? Kairos Theology?
Kairos Classroom.
Sorry, yeah. Kairos Classroom.
Kairos Classroom.
All right. So I'll put a link in that. Courtney, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to yours truly, a place we go to think out loud.